And welcome everybody to another edition of Tidal Flooding Talk, brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition. I'm meteorologist Joe Martucci. Joined with me, meteorologist Dan Skeldon. Dan, we are deep into March now. I don't know about you, but once we get past like St. Patrick's Day, I'm done with winter, and I'm really hoping that April ends up being a nice, warm, and sunny month for us.
Oh, very seldom do you get snow in April, but in the spirit of April Fool's Day coming up, Mother Nature can occasionally, throw a little wrench in the spring plans. But let's hope for a nice spring. It's been a long winter. It's been a cold winter, so I think everyone, even the snow lovers, are ready for the spring season.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We had that taste of severe weather a little bit earlier in the month. Maybe we can do without that, but we can take those 70-degree days we had earlier here. Our guest for today, we're really happy to have him, Bob Kopp. He's a distinguished professor at Rutgers University in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences, and also helped to lead the Rutgers STAP report. This is an updated version that talks everything about New Jersey and climate change. We're going to talk about sea level rise. We're going to talk about tidal flooding. We'll bring him onto the show. Thank you so much for joining us here as we talk about this report.
My pleasure.
I should ask, are you done with winter? Where are you on snow and winter at this point?
I could be done with it.
Okay, you can be done with it. Okay, fair enough. I think we're all in agreement here. This report that you put out came out last year. I had the opportunity to to review a good portion of this. I really loved your last edition of it. I used it frequently as I was whether it's for talks or for stories that we did. So let's just start with a 30,000-foot view. Could we talk about this scientific and technical advisory panel and what it is? Maybe not so much the results, but what it is.
So the key part in taking all of the rich body of stuff in the scientific literature and turning it into useful form is scientific assessment, right? Looking across what the literature has to say, condensing that into assessments of what can we, from this body of literature, say about things like how much sea level has risen or will rise in New Jersey. So I'm involved in a lot of different climate assessments. This report, the New Jersey's Rising Seas and Changing Coastal Storms, this is the third Science and Technical Advisory Panel update that we have done for New Jersey. So the first one was in 2016, second one in 2019, and this one in 2025. So this is organized by the New Jersey Climate Resource Center, which is a state-supported unit at Rutgers that is charged under statute with drawing together the expertise of the higher education and the research community in the state to inform climate decision-making. So we brought together a group of, I'm not sure the exact number, about 15 scientists from across New Jersey and beyond who have expertise relevant to sea level rise, coastal storms, and their impacts. We deliberated collectively to produce this assessment. It was reviewed by external reviewers, and it was supported in all this by the great team at the Climate Change Resource Center and funded both by the Climate Change Resource Center and the Department of Environmental Protection.
So, Bob, you said this is the third version, yeah, right? So the second update. Is there a process as to when these updates are provided? Is it funding related? Is it change in information related?
It's both. So the last two were supported by the state. The first one was done by a group called the New Jersey Climate Change Alliance, which was sort of a network at a time when the state was not so active in climate. But yeah, so it's partially funding. It's also partially, there's a period at which it makes sense to re-examine this. So the previous report came out in 2019. That was before the last IPCC report. It was before the last federal sort of sea level assessment. The relevant part of the last IPCC report came out in 2021. The relevant part of the federal assessment came out in 2022 and 2023. And so it was time to redo this report based on both what we had suggested and also what the state wanted to do.
Got it. let's get into this now. The 2025 staff report, builds on previous assessments. What are the key new findings or updates? And can we talk about tidal flooding specifically in New Jersey since that 2019 report?
Yeah, well, let me give you the big picture first. Right. I mean, the big picture is that sea level rise is accelerating in New Jersey and it's accelerating globally. And this is, we've known for multiple assessment cycles, and it continues to be true. There's better information now on what exactly is contributing to the budget of sea level rise here in New Jersey. So we know of over the last 30 years or so, we've had about half a foot of sea level rise in New Jersey. About a quarter of that is sort of long-term geological processes related to the last ice age, not to human-caused climate change. About a quarter is the expansion of the ocean as it warms up. About a quarter is the melting of ice on land. And then about a quarter is a bunch of other factors that include changes in ocean winds and currents, that includes sinking of the land due to groundwater withdrawal, among other terms. So that's sort of the sea level pattern. And we also know that as sea level has risen, it takes less and less of an extreme tide or less and less of a storm to cause the same amount of flooding. So what NOAA calls a minor flood day in the 1950s, it happened every year or two. Over the period between 2007 and 2024, on average, there's been about 12 tidal flood days or just flood days a year on the shore, ranging between 4 in 2007 and 23 and 2024. It's not like a monotonic increase, but there's a long-term trend with some variability on top of it. So we're seeing that it just becomes easier and easier to get this sort of flooding as sea levels rise. So NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, basically has this approach for saying what's a minor flood day, what's a moderate flood day, what's a major flood day. And so anything that's any one of those, and they're mostly minor flood days associated with tidal flooding, counts as one of those.
Bob, your report kind of confirms what we talk about on tidal flooding all the time, and that it is occurring and it's becoming more and more frequent. What is how does the state, how do the people in the know and people that have to act use the information in your report?
Well, I mean, I think there's a number of things. One, I mean, you've probably come across, if you work on coastal stuff, the new NJDEP rules. I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but it's real rules. Yes, resilient environments, landscapes. In the real rules, the state has chosen to index on sea level rise projections for the end of the century that have about a 17% chance of being exceeded, right? So if you're within, if you're basically trying to say, okay, within the zone that would be flooded, on it with a 1% chance with 4 feet of sea level rise, there are additional reporting requirements and permitting requirements. So that's sort of the most direct use in state policy is in those rules. But also if you're doing a hazard mitigation plan for a community, or you're thinking about land use planning, you're doing anything where you're looking a couple of decades ahead, right? These sorts of numbers can help you say, okay, well, what is probably at risk, and how are we going to respond to that? And this is a large number, right? I mean, just to contextualize it, by 2050, our projection or median projection is that there will be about 1.3 feet of sea level rise relative to the beginning of the century. What that means is, right now we're averaging around 12 coastal flood days per year on the shore. With 1.3 feet of sea level rise, that would go up to about 70 flood days a year, right? Wow. So that's the places that get that the roads being flooded, minor inconvenience, but real economic costs, like those become increasingly frequent unless you do something to manage the risk and live with that.
That's pretty impressive, a jump, right? From 12 to 70
Yeah.
right, in the next 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, and the way to think about it, right? If you think about like a bell curve, right? If you just have a steady increase uh, in this case, average sea level, but the same is true if you're thinking about extreme heat and average temperature, right? The number of days that used to be at the far end of the bell curve grows exponentially as that edge of the curve sort of moves towards the center of the distribution, and that's what's happening here.
Thanks to the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, your flood insurance bills are lower and your streets safer from the reality of flooding. Since beginning in 2013, we build more resilient shoreline communities. Our member towns develop and share in best practices that anticipate future concerns and create flooding solutions. From our town-specific free web app for flooding information to our weekly Tidal Flooding Talk show, we focus on flooding 24/7. Visit www.njcoastalcoalition.com for more. Welcome back, everybody, to Tidal Flooding Talk. Good to be with you here. Just as a reminder, we have new episodes that come out every Tuesday, and now we're on pretty much every major podcast platform. So we were mostly video only. We've jumped more into the audio world here, and we're excited to do this. We're joined again with Bob Kopp, and we're going to talk about the Rutgers stamp report that we had here. You broke down pretty nicely, what those influences of sea level rise, what's causing these levels of sea level rise. Are we seeing a shift in those causes? I know you can't really see that too much in 5 years probably, but what have we seen over time?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think we see a huge shift, right? Because if you go back to the middle of the 19th century, the only term, right, is that long-term geological response to the end of the last ice age, right? So a quarter, what was a quarter now, used to be basically 100%. We are also seeing, at the global scale, the land ice contribution increasing over the last couple decades, right? So it's an increasing contribution, particularly from Greenland and Antarctica. So increasing that land ice term relative to the thermal expansion. Subsidence. So this is an interesting run, right? There's about a millimeter per year, or about 15 to 20% difference between sea level rise at, say, Sandy Hook and sea level rise at the Battery, right? Why? Well, Sandy Hook and Atlantic City and Cape May, right? Those are our New Jersey coastal tide gauges. They are all sitting on the coastal plain, right? A pile of sand. We pump groundwater out of that pile of sand, the pile of sand sinks. The Battery is sitting on bedrock in Manhattan, so it doesn't do that, right? And so that subsidence term associated with groundwater withdrawal is another human-caused factor on top of those associated with climate change. And it's something that does vary over time, has regional demand for groundwater changes. So you can see, for instance, there's a different pattern over the period since World War II at, say, Sandy Hook versus Atlantic City that reflects different groundwater pumping. So it's not a huge part of the overall sea level signal, but it's not negligible either, and it's something that is directly affected by local decision making.
And Bob, is it safe to say too that those percentages, like what caused, tidal flooding and the sea level rise is a global issue, but region by region, let's say those percentages in New Jersey, may be different than Florida, or different than California, and different coastal areas?
Yeah. So first of all, the geological part, right? That is regional. The subsidence part, that's regional. Changes in atmosphere and ocean dynamics, right? The fact that the Gulf Stream seems to be changing and that's having effects on sea level coast, that's regional. What's also somewhat less intuitive is that when you melt ice, that has different spatial patterns, right? So if you melt ice on Greenland, it takes so much ice melting to raise sea level. It's 360 billion tons of ice for 1 millimeter of sea level. That doing that changes the shape of Earth's gravitational field and the rotation of the Earth. The consequence of which, if you happen to be near a melting ice sheet, and we are relatively speaking close to Greenland compared to most of the world, you actually get less sea level rise than the global average, right? Oh. Because in fact, in Greenland, if the ice sheet melts, you get a sea level fall. because you're losing that gravitational attraction. So we get about half the global average sea level rise if Greenland melts, and we get about 20% more than the global average if Antarctica melts. So those are long spatial patterns that are associated with moving these giant masses of ice around at the surface of the Earth.
Wow. Okay. So simply put, how do you do this research? Like, how do you know about that gravitational pull? How do you find that? How is the sausage made on it?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of different lines of evidence for this. The understanding of the gravitational effect on ice sheets goes back to physical theory that was done in the 1880s, and has been improved over time. So some of that is physical theory, and then computational models of gravitation and rotation. And then over the last 2-3 decades, we actually have satellites that measure the Earth's gravitational field, and so you can start to pick out these what we sometimes call sea level fingerprints out of those records. For atmosphere ocean dynamics, maybe it's a little more intuitive. We have satellites that measure how high the ocean is almost everywhere at this point, and you can see the rate at which the sea surface is rising differs from place to place, and we can understand those in terms of the changes in winds and currents. If we're trying to measure changes in ice sheets, we've got a bunch of different lines of evidence. We can measure how high the ice sheet is. We can also measure how much the ice sheet weighs, again, from those satellites. And so that we can track the changes in the mass of the ice sheets in different parts of the ice sheets over time. But then if we're just asking, well, how much is sea level rising in New Jersey? Well, there we turn to tide gauges, and those the oldest tide gauge in New Jersey is at Atlantic City, goes back to 1912, and it's at its core, it's a stick in the ground with a floaty bit. And if you measure the stick in the ground with the floaty bit every hour for 114 years, you get a pretty good data set.
And we know Jan and I know that location very well, right off the steel pier over
Yeah,
We do.
there. Yeah.
Oh, Bob, I guess how long, like, was wondering about the panel that puts this report together. Like you said, like a lot of different scientists. Like, what branches of scientists do you bring together for this report? And then how long does it take to kind of process all this information and
yeah.
put everything together?
I think so. We probably took about a year to do the whole process, but probably most of it was done in the course of 2 or 3 months. But we also are drawing on this is derivative of the fact that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the National Climate Assessment, these larger scale assessment bodies, spent in the case of the IPCC, it's usually about a 3-year global process to assess the scientific literature, and that is a core input to basically any nation's as climate assessment and to the work we've done here. So like the sea level rise projections in this report, that's based on stuff that we developed at Rutgers, but that was, we developed at Rutgers really for the 6th assessment report, of the IPCC, which I was one of the authors of. And so, the sea level rise projections you get here, they're slightly updated. They're presented in a way that draws upon feedback we've gotten from users of our projections. But they're not that different actually than if you just went to the IPCC sea level projections, which you can do at sealevel.nasa.gov/IPCC, and looked in at what the IPCC in our chapter that I was one of the authors of had to say for New Jersey. So that projection system has become a community resource that we've developed and are continuing to develop, and we leverage that here.
Cool.
So it depends on how you define how long it takes, whether it could be 7 years, could be 3 months.
It's all relative. I mean, we have 30 seconds with you, and we really appreciate the time. Do you want to boil down, what other takeaway you want people to know about this, and where people can follow more of your work?
Yeah. What we know is sea level rise and related factors are mastered coastal flooding more intense. That includes coastal flooding from tidal flooding, but it also includes hurricanes. It also includes nor'easters. We know that's creating erosional pressures on the shore, and what those look like are going to depend a lot on management decisions that are being made by people. We know that our wetlands in New Jersey are sort of near the maximum rate of sea level rise at which it's possible for wetlands to keep pace with sea level rise. And if sea level rise accelerates, that's going to be challenging for them. And we know that saltwater intrusion is a growing risk, and as well as flooding driven by groundwater. So these are all risks that are associated with the sea level rise. I also serve as director of a consortium called the Megalopolitan Coastal Transformation Hub, which is a network of 13 universities focused on the science and practice of coastal adaptation. And people can learn more about that at coastalhub.org.
Awesome. Well,
Great.
hey, thanks so much for coming on and talking about this. We've wanted to have you on for a while here and talk about this report, so we appreciate the time.
My pleasure.
Great. Thanks to the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, your flood insurance bills are lower and your streets safer from the reality of flooding. Since beginning in 2013, we build more resilient shoreline communities. Our member towns develop and share in best practices that anticipate future concerns and create flooding solutions. From our town-specific free web app for flooding information to our weekly Tidal Flooding Talk show, we focus on flooding 24/7. Visit www.njcoastalcoalition.com for more. And we are back. Thank you to Bob Kopp for joining us here. A little bit different. Dan and I are going to recap a little bit here. We'll do the one thing we can't stop talking about. Dan, any takeaways from this?
I think it's amazing how much ice it takes for a 1 millimeter ice melt. It takes for a 1 millimeter. What was it? It was 300
1 millimeter of sea level rise.
Yeah, 1 millimeter of sea level rise. That number was impressive. I'm a stats guy, so when I hear interesting stats, which I do all the time on Tidal Flooding Talk, it kind of sticks out.
Yeah. I think like my takeaway was I don't really have much of a takeaway because there was a lot of what we knew. It's always good. It's good in science if you keep coming to the same conclusion over and over again. That increases your confidence that something's happening. And we, as a part, all of our coastal coalition communities, we talk about at our monthly meetings. We talk about in our MJPPI meetings. How we inform people about the risks of tidal flooding and then also building up against it. And that's how, we're part of the FEMA CRS program, community rating system that helps save municipalities discounts or gives municipalities discounts on their federal flood insurance. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And if his projections are even like half right, you go from 12 tidal flooding days a year to 70, by 2050. Even if half of that's right, you're doubling or tripling the number of tidal flooding days. And, if the projection's spot on, you're increasing it fivefold, which is, again, confirms what we know, is becoming more common. It's just, how more common, how quickly, and how many more severe days you're going to have as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I even feel like 12 is low. It feels like it's like 24 days a year where we get them, but maybe some locations are more sensitive than others. We've seen that, like Manalocan, for example, in Waretown, they flood more often than Sandy Hook, let's say.
Sure.
So anyway, let's get into the one thing we can't stop talking about: tidal flooding or otherwise. Go for it, Dan.
Well, it's the last day of March. I'll throw out March Madness, and we record these a couple days ahead of time.
Yes, okay.
My favorite time of the year, all right, March Madness, and I will say we're recording this at the start of the tournament, okay? And I have Michigan State going all the way, so we'll see how I do, in hindsight, next week.
Okay, a 3 seed.
I do, yeah, Michigan State. I actually golfed with Tom Izzo one time.
Did you?
Yeah, he was an Upper Michigan native and Iron Mountain, Michigan, way up in the Upper Peninsula, which just as we're recording this got like 40 something inches of snow. Better them than us. Huge blizzard up there. But yeah, he has a golf tournament because he's from Iron Mountain and got to golf in that one year. So whatever Michigan State's in it, and I think they have somewhat of a chance. It's my sentimental pick.
I think it's always a good deal, and I know they got a lot of NIL money coming their way next year, so
Yeah.
they'll probably be more of like a 1 seed in the years to come. I mean, I'll stick with March Madness too, since we're both bracketing here. I'm still deliberating over my winner right now, Dan, but I do have St. John's in the Final Four. I can't believe that they got a low seed. They got a 5 seed. That was incredible to me. I watched them play Saturday against UConn in the Big East Championship. They stomped on them. and then they get a 2 seed UConn. So
Yeah, I thought the same thing, and I think they're going to use that for motivation. I have them.
I'm sorry, 4 seed St. John is. Did I say 5?
They are a 5.
Oh, I
They
was right.
should they should have gotten a 4, but they got a 5. So yeah, I have them into the Elite Eight anyway. So I think they're going to use that seed kind of shortage to for motivation.
Yeah. All right. Well, good luck to our brackets. We'll see what happens. You let us know how we're doing, Tidal Flooding Talk fan, by the time you guys listen to this. So, anyway, we thank Bob Kopp for his time. We really appreciate it. We will be back with you next week with new episodes. We'll get the whole gang back together. Sorry, Palma couldn't make it for this episode. Remember, new episodes every Tuesday night, and we are now on podcasting too, so you can check us out there. Take care, everybody.